Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Keith Silva. Here at Across the Fence, we pride ourselves on celebrating agriculture of all kinds, but we hold a special place in our hearts for the annual award given to the Vermont Dairy Farm of the Year. This year's award was given to Ackermann Dairy Farm of Hardwick. Through grit, determination, and a savvy business acumen, in less than a decade of realizing their dream to own their own farm, the Ackermanns have become leaders in Vermont's dairy industry. But wait, there's more. As it turns out, Vermont's Top Dairy Award is one of 6 such designations in New England. Since 1948, the Green Pastures Program has been celebrating and emphasizing the importance of a viable dairy industry in New England. Now in its Diamond Jubilee, this organization continues to honor an outstanding dairy family from each of the New England states. Our guest today is John Porter, an emeritus of UNH Extension. He has dedicated his time and effort to this organization for nearly 50 years. Thanks for being with us, John.
Thank you. Enjoyed having the opportunity to come.
Before we talk about Green Pastures, you told me that you are truly a longtime viewer of our program. Tell our viewers how Across the Fence determined when afternoon chores got done on the farm you grew up on.
Well, I grew up on a dairy farm in Lebanon, New Hampshire, which is just across the river from Vermont. And we got Channel 3 WCAX out of Burlington. And my father wasn't a real close cooperator of New Hampshire Extension, but Across the Fence was kind of his link to the universities. And I remember the early hosts. I think there was a Stu Hall, and then Tony did it for a long time. And that was kind of our tradition at lunch, especially during the summer when I was home. Before we went out to hang, we always saw all across the fence. And I remember hearing people like Stu Gibson and Win Way, and that was our link to kind of university research.
So no haying got done until Across the Fence had aired.
That's right.
The Green Pastures Program has a rich history that begins with a boast from a former governor of your state, New Hampshire. Tell us about it.
Well, Governor Dale made this little boast that New Hampshire had better pastures than any of the other New England states, and he wrote a letter and challenged them. He wrote the letter in 1947 and proposed starting a program in 1948 to judge the pastures in all 6 states, and he bet that if New Hampshire didn't have the best pastures in New England, he would give a hat to each one of the commissioners. And he actually lost the bet and ceremoniously gave a hat to each one of the commissioners. And we have a picture of
that. John, I've heard about this hat for years. Was it a specific kind of hat? Did it say, live free or die on it or something like that?
No, it was kind of the derby dress hat of that day. But at our 60th anniversary, our commissioner, Steve Taylor, did a reenactment. And we actually made up some baseball hats that said Green Pastures that we gave out to each commissioner.
The Green Pastures Program has close ties to the Big E in West Springfield, Massachusetts. Talk about the connection between the Big E and Green Pastures.
Well, way back, Zoo Zahner kind of got this program started based on some things that he had seen in England. And he was with the Federal Bank in Boston, and he got things started. Then he transferred over to the Banquet cooperatives. And about that time, Eastern States took it over. And ever since then, it's been an Eastern States sponsored event for the Banquet. And they give free passes to everybody to come who are winners, and tickets, and provide a space for the meeting. And they really roll out the red carpet for the winners.
We have the winners of this year's Green Pastures Program for 2023. Here they are represented from Connecticut, Maine, and Massachusetts. And then the other 3 remaining states, New Hampshire, Vermont, and Rhode Island. John, I noticed Rhode Island does not have a winner selected this year. What's up with that?
Well, as you know, Rhode Island is a small dairy state. I think there's only about 6 or 7 farms left. And rather than just rotating the same people, they sort of wait till another generation has come along or something different has happened on a farm. So sometimes they'll skip a year or 2, and then there'll be someone come back in because they've done something innovative. And so they've skipped for a couple of years, and we may see them back in a year or 2.
Yes, it's hard to believe, but there are just over 1,000 dairy farms in New England, in all of the 6 New England states. Vermont has the lion's share of those at over 500. More than a celebration of winners, you have a banquet that takes place that you mentioned that's held on the grounds of the Big E. It occurred this past weekend, and it allows these farm families to share their story with their peers. What's the significance of giving them this opportunity?
Well, it's a chance for them to share what they've done, and they each have about a 15-minute slot on the program, and they either do a PowerPoint or a video, and it's a chance to tell their story, and then they actually have a breakfast together with just the farmers the following day, and a lot of rich discussion is generated from the PowerPoints they've seen, the discussions the night before, and a lot of information exchange, and then just putting these PowerPoints together. And the hosts usually develop a nice summary about the farm, and some of those become basis for a future, maybe a TV interview or a newspaper interview. And the idea is to multiply, this impact and let the public know about dairy farming. And the New England Dairy Council does a really nice job of picking up on this and getting this in a lot of media outlets.
John, as I said, the number of cattle dairies in New England has been declining, just over 1,000 remaining in all the 6 New England states. Why continue to highlight this industry, some might say? Shouldn't it just be put out to pasture?
Well, I think we see this as an important thing for just awareness for the public, because you've got the public, they're voting in representatives in the state legislature. The legislature listens to people. The legislature follows, things that are happening in the industries. And I think we need an educated public that would be supportive of farming. And in farming, Chris has noises and odors and things like that. But that would people appreciate this is where their food comes from, and that they need to support it. And it's really an important part of the local economy.
And also the idea of food security and the fact that a lot of the food in this country comes from the West Coast, comes from big dairies out in California and the Midwest, and the dairies that are in Vermont are very important to, as you said, the local economy, but also just to having food, at supermarkets and available.
And I would say milk is one of the commodities that's probably the most important for local production because of the freshness of milk. You can argue that, asparagus and things can be shipped across the country, but you'll find that most of your bottled milk comes from a pretty close radius of the population.
Right. This award, as you've been saying, has its roots in policymakers and political administrators. What does Green Pastures have to say today to today's politician?
Well, I think we just want to promote that farming is important, and because all these New England states, tourism is important. And I contend that I call it that farmers are the stewards of the land of these states. And if we didn't have dairy farming, our states would look a lot different, and the tourist backdrop that's there would not be there. People don't come to look at, mall strips. They like, country settings and so forth. And so I think we just want to give an appreciation of what agriculture does for the economy and even the overall look of the state.
John, you've been involved in this, as we said, for many, many years, decades. Have you seen changes in the winners? Have you seen more innovation? Is that what's gaining people? Is that what's winning this award? Or is it just hard work and getting up every day and milking the cows?
Well, of course, it started with pastures, and because that was pasturing was a big thing back in the 40s and 50s. And then we got into the 60s, we had freestyle housing and confined housing and feeding in the barn and so forth. So the program changed a little bit from emphasizing just pastures to other management, involvement in the community, how the production is and that sort of thing. And then interesting enough, we've sort of evolved back a little bit to our roots in that pasturing and rotational grazing became popular again at the turn of the century. And so we're seeing a few pasture winners now. And now another thing that's been different is organic farming. And actually, Vermont has had quite a few organic farm winners. So it's kind of changed with things, and yes, we've been seeing innovations. We're starting to see people that have put in robots and mechanized feeding and mechanized push-up feeding, mechanized manure handling. So it's changed with the industry, but pasturing has actually come back just a little bit with rotational grazing.
Yes, it's interesting to note that the last two winners of this award in Vermont were both organic farms, and they, of course, raise their animals on pasture. So
Yep.
perhaps everything that's old is new again.
Yeah.
John, how does the Green Pastures program support extension programs in each of the 6 New England states?
Well, some people don't realize this, but Green Pastures is just a source of accumulating donations, and they use it for the banquet. But they also have a budget to extend out into education for extension. And they have been very instrumental ever since the founding of the organization of supporting in-service training for extension, putting together meetings that bring dairymen together to talk about issues. They've been involved in milk marketing. And so in the background, they've really done a lot. And I know as a young agent, when I started out, those New England in-service trainings meant a lot to me. And I met other staff members. That's how I got to know, like Stu Gibson and some of these Vermont people. And I know it's meant a lot to educators to have that opportunity.
So it's not just something that is for this one day, 1 hour, a nice dinner for some folks. It has an impact beyond just the grounds of the Big E and just to these individual farms.
It does. And also, we have an advisory board that's just an informal group made up of former winners and extension. And we actually meet twice a year, spring and fall, mostly by Zoom now, but we have done it in person. So there's an active advisory group that meets twice a year.
Well, John, congratulations to this year's winners of the Green Pastures Award and to your organization for 75 years of supporting and celebrating New England's dairy industry. Kudos to everyone here at WCAX who make this program possible. And as always, thank you for stopping by Across the Fence.